this is propaganda. And I sort of set out to do some of my own research to maybe even prove them wrong. And very quickly, when I actually went beyond what I had learned to actually what was being written about the subject, the research itself, I began to realize that I was the person who was missing a lot of the information, that I was the person who was misinformed. And at that point, I didn't know who to believe anymore. Here I have things that I've heard from my family, my community, that aren't kind of adding up with what I'm researching. So I decided to go and to see with my own two eyes what was happening. And that's when I took my first trip to Palestine. And that's what I'll be telling you about today during my 2 o'clock presentation with photographs, slides, music, etc., outlining the situation for Palestinians in the occupied territories. I had been to Israel before on a Birthright Israel tour, but when I went back to actually see what was happening from a different perspective, I found a lot of things that you're not going to get on one of these Birthright Israel tours. I found a place where the lives of close to 4 million people are under strict control of a military that separates everyday mothers, fathers, doctors, teachers, farmers, children from their jobs, their schools, their hospitals, and from each other. On this trip to Palestine, I found families whose homes had been demolished with no warning because they didn't have a building permit that Israel had actually denied them time and time again. I comforted a friend whose 6-month-old baby died in her arms of an asthma attack as they were held by Israeli soldiers at a checkpoint, unable to get to the hospital. I visited villages that had been intentionally covered in raw sewage to force the inhabitants to evacuate, clearing the area for exclusively Jewish settlement, places that I could go and live in, but the inhabitants had been cleared away with raw sewage. I saw the Jewish-only settlements and the 25-foot concrete wall that Israel is building on Palestinian land with our tax dollars, with my tax dollars. I interviewed an 11-year-old girl who was used as a human shield to defend 10 soldiers as they invaded Palestinian homes in her neighborhood. I witnessed the denial of access to religious holy sites for Palestinian Muslims and Christians, most of whom are not allowed to visit Jerusalem. So perhaps you will say, and I said for a long time, these things are terrible, but let's work on reforming Israel. Let's make Israel all that it can be. Let's make it a democracy. Why must we talk about Zionism, the idea of a Jewish state? Why must we talk about this? Why can't we just improve Israel? The thing is, what Israel is doing to the Palestinian people is not somehow a perversion of what Israel could be or should be. It is an inevitability of having a Jewish state in a place where the majority of the people who have rights to the land are not Jewish. You see, in order to create a Jewish state, the founders of Israel, the place that they wanted to create a Jewish state on, well, the majority of the people there were Christians and Muslims. You can't have a Jewish state with a non-Jewish majority, and so in order to create a Jewish state, it was required that the non-Jewish population be removed from the land. And so, we can talk about the idea of a Jewish state. We can talk about the persecution of Jews throughout history, which I certainly do not dispute. It's been a very big part of my upbringing. But we have to understand what practically it means to have a Jewish state in a territory where the majority of the people with rights there simply are not Jewish. So what you had in 1947 to 1949, and we have arguably the world expert here tonight talking about this, so I won't get into it. You can find out much more from him, Ilan Pape, who will be speaking in a little while. What you had was basically the ethnic cleansing of the Christian and Muslim populations from the area. And I use this word ethnic cleansing very carefully. This was the intentional removal of a population specifically on the basis of their religion and their ethnicity. This is the definition of ethnic cleansing. And not, necessarily because these were mean people who wanted to see people suffer, but because, well, if you want to have an ethnically pure state and there is this kind of diversity, there are only so many options. So finally, through this ethnic cleansing that Dr. Pape will talk about, you finally created a Jewish majority in a place where formerly there wasn't one. And still today, if you go to Israel, perhaps on one of these Birthright Israel tours, for example, you will find that there is a Jewish majority in Israel. But it is an artificial majority, not an organic one. It's a majority that was created intentionally by denying rights to the Christian and Muslim populations in the area. It's a majority that is not only was created in this way, but is maintained by rendering life so intolerable for the Christian and Muslim population in the area that anybody who can leave, almost anybody who can leave, does leave. And so again, we begin to sort of dissect this idea of a Jewish state. And we also begin to dissect this question about Israel's existence to begin with. You know, we hear a lot about Hamas not recognizing the right of Israel to exist, former Palestinian leaders not recognizing the right of Israel to exist, and I can say personally, when I first heard these things, I was shocked. I thought, how could anybody not recognize the right for a historically persecuted people not to have their own place? But this is not exactly what the question is. I mean, in order to answer the question, does Israel have a right to exist, we have to define what we mean by Israel. So do we mean a place where Jewish people can be safe and secure? If that's what we mean, of course Jews have a right to be safe and secure. Everybody has that right. But that's not what Israel is. Israel defines itself, I'm going by its own definition here, defines itself very specifically. It is the state of the Jewish people. So it's not the state of its citizens. It's the state of a lot of people who are not its citizens, including me. Even if I never go to Israel my whole life, because I'm Jewish, it is my state, it's mine. And it's not the state of a lot of people who are its citizens. The non-Jewish population in Israel, even those who have citizenship, do not have first-class citizenship. They may have second or third or fourth-class citizenship. Contrary to popular belief that Israel is a democracy, it is arguably close to a democracy for the Jewish population, but not at all for the non-Jewish population in the area who have citizenship. And those are the lucky ones. The Palestinians with Israeli citizenship, the few who remained after the ethnic cleansing in 1947 to 1949, the vast majority of the Palestinian population are either living under this brutal occupation that I will be describing in my presentation at 2 o'clock, or they don't even have the luxury of living under occupation. They're not even allowed into historic Palestine since it's all under Israeli control, and Israel will systematically deny entry to Palestinians, even with American citizenship, if they can see that that person has Palestinian blood, that that person was born in Palestine, or their parents were born there. They are excluded. So you ask a Palestinian person, do you recognize the right for there to be a state on your historic homeland that explicitly excludes you? And excludes your children, and excludes your people, that existence requires that you either leave or that you be discriminated against. And that Palestinian person says, no, I don't think there's a right for a place on my homeland in which I have no place. Is that anti-Semitism? Or is that a pretty predictable response given this framework of exclusivity? These are the kinds of analyses that we simply aren't getting here in the US mainstream media, and it's incredible to me to have this kind of organization on campus here that people are able to get this message, especially with Dr. Pape's presentation tonight. Of course, it's not only Palestinians who do not recognize the right of Israel to exist. There are many Jewish people also who oppose Zionism. In fact, I always make a point of distinguishing in my presentations the differences between these different categories that are oftentimes conflated. So I say I'm Jewish. What does it mean to be Jewish? Well, somebody who's Jewish is somebody either of the Jewish religion, faith, or the Jewish lineage. My mother is Jewish, her mother is Jewish, etc. It's a bloodline. And that is different from what it means to be Israeli. Israeli is a citizenship. An Israeli is a citizen of the state of Israel. And that is different from what it means to be a Zionist. Zionism being a political ideology focused on having an exclusively Jewish state in historic Palestine. So these are three separate categories: Jewish, Israeli, Zionist, and sometimes they come together in one person, but they are not the same thing. There are Jews who are not Israeli, like me. There are Israelis who are not Jewish. About 20% of the people who do have Israeli citizenship are Palestinian. There are Jews who are anti-Zionist, who say this land should be for anybody who's been living there for generations. It doesn't matter what their religion is or their ethnicity. And then there are Zionists who are not Jewish. The increasingly influential Christian Zionist movement, largely based in this country, focused on fueling the conflict to bring about Armageddon and the return of the Messiah. Anyway, these are